All right, so let's jump right into it. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I know a lot of people have been thinking about.
Hmm.
It's that possible connection between, um, those mRNA COVID-19 vaccines that everybody's heard so much about
Right.
and heart conditions,
Right.
specifically myocarditis and pericarditis.
Yes.
Um, and we've got some really fascinating research here from Japan.
Yeah, this is a really interesting study. It uses data from Japan's Adverse Drug Event Report database.
Okay.
And this is a database that has information going all the way back to 2004,
Wow.
all the way through the end of last year, 2023.
Okay, so a really long period.
Yes, a very large data set. And they focus specifically on the two mRNA vaccines that most people got,
Gotcha.
the Pfizer-BioNTech and
Right.
the Moderna.
Okay, so a massive data set
Mhm.
and the vaccines most people got.
Right.
Before we get to what they found, can you just remind us what myocarditis and pericarditis actually are?
Sure.
I know they're both heart conditions, but I think a little refresher would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me and for the listeners.
So, the easiest way to think about it is your heart's a pump, right?
Okay.
Myocarditis is when the heart muscle itself gets inflamed.
Okay.
Pericarditis is when the inflammation is happening in the pericardium, which is like the sac that surrounds the heart.
Ah.
So one is the pump and one's the bag it comes in.
Okay, I like that visual. That really helps.
Yeah.
So what did this Japanese study find? Was there actually a connection between these vaccines and myocarditis and pericarditis?
Well, that's the interesting part, is they did find a statistically significant association,
Hmm.
and they used what's called reporting odds ratios,
Okay.
or RRs,
RRs.
to kind of measure how strong that association was.
We got to be honest. RRRs.
Mhm.
That always sounds a little intimidating to me.
I know. It's a mouthful.
Can you just break that down for us? What did those numbers actually tell us?
Yeah. So basically, imagine you're looking at two groups of people.
Right.
One group got the vaccine and one group didn't. The ROR tells you how much more likely the vaccinated group was to report those heart conditions.
Okay.
So a higher ROR means there's a stronger link.
Gotcha. So what were the RORs in this study? What did they find?
Well, for myocarditis, the overall ROR was 30.51.
Okay.
And if you break it down by vaccine, it was 15.64 for the Pfizer
So what?
and 54.23 for Moderna.
Wow, that Moderna number is, yeah, that's pretty high.
That's pretty striking. Yeah.
What about pericarditis?
Yeah, so for pericarditis, the overall RR was 21.99,
Okay.
15.78 for Pfizer, and 27.03 for Moderna.
Okay, so still significant, but the Moderna numbers are definitely jumping out here.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so there is a link,
Right,
and it does seem like Moderna is maybe a little more strongly associated,
right.
but was everybody equally affected?
So that's a good question. And what they found was that there were actually some patterns
Okay.
in who was most likely to develop these heart conditions after vaccination.
All right, hit me with those patterns. I'm really curious about that.
Okay, so the first pattern they found was about age.
Right.
The vast majority of the cases, we're talking like the bulk of them,
Right.
happened in people 30 years old or younger.
Okay, so younger people. That's not what I would have guessed.
It's a little bit surprising.
That was the other pattern.
The other pattern was about sex.
Okay.
Men were significantly more likely to develop these heart conditions after vaccination than women were.
Okay, so younger and male. That definitely raises some questions.
Right.
Why would those groups be more susceptible? Any ideas?
Well, there are some possible explanations, but it's important to remember we need more research.
Fair enough. Let's hear those possible explanations.
Yeah.
What are the researchers thinking so far?
Yeah, so one thought is that there could be, biological differences at play.
Okay.
Men and women's immune systems, they can react differently.
Makes sense.
And then there might be hormonal influences too.
Yeah. Makes sense. And then younger people, their immune systems are still developing, so maybe that plays a role.
Exactly. That's another possible explanation.
Okay. So we've got the link. We know who is generally more affected.
Right.
What about the timing? When did these heart conditions tend to show up after vaccination?
So that's another really fascinating part of this. Most cases of myocarditis and pericarditis happened really soon after vaccination.
Okay.
We're talking within 8 days.
Wow. Really? That's incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And I remember reading something about an early failure type pattern.
Yes.
What does that even mean in this context?
Mhm.
Makes it sound like we're talking about, like machines breaking or something.
Yeah, it's not your typical medical jargon, is it?
No, not at all.
But it's actually a pretty good analogy.
Okay.
Think about it this way. Imagine you buy a brand new phone,
Right.
and it breaks down on the first week.
Right.
You're probably thinking there's a manufacturing defect,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
So this early failure type pattern they found on the data could suggest that something similar is happening with the vaccine. It's like, in some people there might be something about how their body initially reacts to the vaccine
Okay.
that leads to these heart issues right away.
So maybe it's not so much a long-term effect, but more of an immediate reaction for certain people.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this is all pretty intense stuff,
Yeah.
but let's switch gears for a second, talk about outcomes.
Okay.
So if someone did develop myocarditis or pericarditis after getting vaccinated, what happened next? What did the study find?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is the study showed a link.
Right.
But it doesn't mean everyone who gets vaccinated is going to have these problems.
Of course, of course.
The good news is that for most people in the study, the outcomes were generally positive.
Okay. Positive, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the data showed that most cases either fully recovered
Okay.
or their symptoms went away.
Okay, so that's good.
So while it's scary to think about these conditions,
Yeah. It seems like most people bounce back pretty well.
okay, that is reassuring.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it wasn't all, good news for everybody.
Right.
Were there any cases where things didn't go so well?
Unfortunately, yes. There were some cases where the conditions were more severe, and sadly, there were even a few that were fatal.
Yeah.
So while most people did recover, it's important to acknowledge that there is a range of experiences.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
And we need to be honest about that.
Yes.
It feels like we've covered a lot of ground already, but
Yeah, we have.
before we go any deeper, maybe we should take a step back and just recap the key points that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Make sure everybody's on the same page.
Right.
All right, so let's do a quick recap. So this Japanese study, they looked at a ton of data, and basically they found this link between mRNA, COVID-19 vaccines, and a higher risk of myocarditis and pericarditis. And of course, we're talking about Pfizer and Moderna here.
Right. And I'm remembering those RORs, those reporting odds ratios.
Yes.
They really showed that connection.
They did.
Especially for the Moderna vaccine, those numbers were higher than I expected.
Yeah, those are definitely eye-catching.
Yeah.
And then we talked about how younger people, and men specifically, seem to be more likely to have these heart issues after getting vaccinated.
Right.
We're still not totally sure why, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to look into there.
Yeah. That whole age and sex thing was really surprising to me.
Yeah.
But what really, stuck out to me was that early failure type pattern that you explained.
Yes.
That, most of these heart problems showed up, just days after getting the shot.
Right, right. It does make you think.
Yeah.
It really points to the idea that it might be something about that initial reaction some people have to the vaccine, at least in some people, that causes these issues, rather than, a long-term effect.
Right. Like that phone analogy you're using.
Yes, exactly.
It really made it click for me.
Good, good.
But thankfully, it sounds like most people who got these conditions did recover.
Right.
Based on what the study said.
Yeah, that's the good news here. The majority of cases, they either recovered completely or saw their symptoms just go away.
Right.
But of course, there were some cases that were more serious.
Right.
And sadly, a few that were fatal. So, we can't ignore those risks.
For sure.
But it's important to look at the whole picture.
Absolutely. So I think we've gone over the main findings here.
Yeah.
And we've tried to be really careful to look at, both the good and the not so good parts.
Yes.
But I think it's time to, zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
And think about how this research fits into the whole, conversation about vaccine safety in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're getting to the big picture. So this study, it adds another layer to this whole discussion about mRNA vaccines.
Right.
I mean, these vaccines, they're pretty new,
Yeah.
and we're still learning about them.
Right. So it's like we're putting together a puzzle.
Yes.
And this is another piece to help us see the full picture.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And this piece is coming from Japan,
Right.
which is important because it gives us a more global perspective on, potential side effects.
That makes sense.
Different people, different populations can react differently to these things.
Gotcha.
So having this data from all over the world is super important.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So this study is helping to like fill in those gaps in what
Yeah.
we know about these vaccines and how they work.
Exactly, exactly. And it also highlights something really, really important,
Okay.
which is that we need to keep watching and researching even after a vaccine is, out there for everybody to get.
Because things change, new things can pop up.
Exactly, exactly. Science, it's always changing.
Right.
What we know today could be totally different from what we know tomorrow.
Right, right.
And this study is like a perfect example
Yeah.
of how that post-market surveillance, it's super important to make sure that these vaccines are safe and they're working like they should.
Yeah, okay. So we've talked about the findings, what they
Mhm.
mean, and why it's so important to keep doing research.
Right.
But there's one thing that's kind of been bugging me since we started talking about this study.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it's that thing about how most of these cases cleared up so fast,
Right.
full recovery or, remission in a pretty short time.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, does that tell us anything about what's really happening?
Mm.
Like on a deeper level?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's something that the study itself doesn't really answer, but it does get you thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Like, could it be that these myocarditis and pericarditis cases that are linked to the vaccine,
Right.
are they like fundamentally different
Mhm.
from the kinds we see that are caused by other things?
Yeah, like viral infections.
Yeah, yeah,
It's definitely something to consider.
right,
Maybe, the way the immune system reacts to the vaccine
right,
in those people who get these heart problems.
right.
Maybe it works in a different way than when it is reacting to a virus.
So are we maybe like lumping different things together
Yeah?
under these labels, myocarditis and pericarditis, when maybe they're actually like different subtypes?
Yeah, it's possible. They might have different triggers, different ways of developing, different long-term effects even.
Yeah,
It's a really important point.
yeah. If that's true, then like everything we think about how we diagnose these conditions, how we treat them,
Exactly.
our whole understanding of what's going on in the body,
Right.
it might need to change.
It might need a complete rethink.
Whoa!
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's like using the same wrench for every bolt.
Right, right.
Even though some need a Phillips head and some need a flathead.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
More research.
Right,
We got to dig deeper into how the immune system is working here.
right.
Figure out why some people react this way to the vaccine and some don't.
Yeah,
Are there genetic factors? Is it something in the environment?
right.
There are so many questions to answer.
It really feels like this study has opened up a whole new, like, chapter in how we understand these conditions.
He really has.
We thought it was a simple story,
Yeah.
but now it's like, whoa, there's a lot more to it.
It's way more complicated than we thought, and that's what's so cool about science right now.
Yeah.
It's always discovering new things, getting more precise, and sometimes like completely changing what we thought we knew.
Right.
This study is a great example of that.
Okay, so we've looked at the findings,
Yeah.
thought about what they mean,
Hmm.
even found some new mysteries.
Right.
But I'm wondering, like, what does all this mean for our listeners?
Mhm.
Why should they care about a study all the way over in Japan?
That's the big question, right? So even though this was done in Japan, what they found matters to everyone.
Okay.
It reminds us that vaccines, just like anything else in medicine, they come with good things and not so good things.
Right.
Knowing about those risks, even if they're rare, is really important for making good decisions about our health.
Yeah, for sure. So this study gives people information they can use to talk to their doctors
Exactly.
about their own health
Yeah.
and what they're worried about.
Yeah, having the knowledge to make the best choices for yourself.
Right, because ultimately it's about our own bodies.
Yes.
It's about our own health.
Yeah.
We need to be part of those conversations.
Exactly. And it's also a reminder that science is a journey.
Right.
There's always new research coming out, adding to what we know about things like vaccine safety.
Right.
So staying curious, asking questions, getting info from good sources, it's all really important.
Yeah, exactly. We got to keep learning about our health and what the latest science says.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've looked at the study's findings, talked about what they mean in the bigger picture, and even touched on how it all relates to our listeners.
Right.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Ooh, I like that. Go ahead. We've been talking about how most of those myocarditis and pericarditis cases, the ones linked to the vaccines, they seem to clear up pretty fast. But does that actually tell us anything? Like, does that fast recovery give us any clues about what's going on, deeper down?
That's the question, isn't it? It
Right.
really makes you think about whether those vaccine-related cases are actually different.
Right. Different from the ones we see that are caused by, like, a virus or something.
Exactly. Maybe what we're calling myocarditis or pericarditis.
Right.
Maybe it's not just one thing.
Yeah, like what if it's actually a bunch of different conditions
Well,
that we've lumped together
I
because
mean,
they look kind of similar on the surface?
you're getting it. And if that's true, then maybe we need to rethink how we're diagnosing and treating these things.
Yeah, okay. I see what you mean. It's like trying to fix everything with the same tool,
Exactly.
even though different problems need different solutions.
A perfect analogy. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, what's the next step?
More research, for sure. We need to really get down to the nitty-gritty of how the immune system is working in these cases.
Okay.
Figure out why some people have this reaction to the vaccine and others don't.
Right, right.
Like, are there certain genes that make someone more likely to have this happen?
Yeah,
Or is it something in the environment?
interesting.
Got a lot more to uncover.
It feels like this study, it's like opened a door to a whole new understanding of these conditions.
It really has.
We thought we knew the story, but it turns out it's way more complicated.
And that's what makes science so fascinating, right? It's a constant process of discovery. Sometimes we refine what we know, and sometimes we have to totally change our thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And this study, it's a perfect example of that.
So we've talked about a lot today,
We have.
but I think the big takeaway is that it's so important to keep learning and asking questions.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to our health.
Couldn't agree more. So until next time, folks, keep those brains buzzing.